What's up guys, it's James Allen, the Out-of-State Investor, and one of the most common questions I get when it comes to buying a house is how much should you put down for a down payment? Now there isn't just one answer that I can blanket across every single person because every person has their own unique situation going on. So today I'm going to go through a few different scenarios, such as maybe you want to get into a house with as little money out of pocket as possible, maybe you're approaching retirement and you just want to know what is the best way to go forward in a safe way, or you might be a young person that wants to build wealth as fast as possible. Either way, there are a lot of things you need to consider when it comes to your down payment, and so because of that, this is going to be a great guide to help you figure out how much you should put down for your down payment. But before I get started, do me a favor and smash that like button, and if you haven't already done so, definitely subscribe and hit that notification bell to watch more content like this. And with that said, let's jump into it. Alright, so in order to understand the right amount of money that you're going to put down on a property, you're normally going to consider two things. On one hand, you have wealth building, which it's no surprise here that real estate builds massive wealth. Over 90% of all millionaires have been made investing in real estate. And you have the ability to build wealth because one of the biggest components of that is you have the ability to leverage your money. You can put down 20% down. Some cases you can put down 5% or even 3% down and yet control all that real estate that you still have, and you get the appreciation on the value of the property, not the value of your down payment. Now this is a big reason why the average net worth of a renter is only $6,300, whereas the average net worth of a homeowner is over $255,000. On the other hand, you have your safety, and when it comes to safety, you got to consider a few different things. First of all, your income against your expenses, okay? They're going to call it your debt to income ratio, and typically lenders are willing to lend you up to 43%, sometimes up to 50% on your debt to income ratio. Now this can be a problem because many people can't afford to really spend 43 to 50% of their income on their mortgage and cover all their other expenses, so they end up getting into trouble, having to sell their house, or end up even worse, going into foreclosure. So for that reason, I highly recommend trying to stay somewhere between 25 to 30% of your income, no more than that, going towards your mortgage, taxes, insurance, and all other housing expenses. Now the other thing you really want to consider is the market cycle, and right now we could very well be approaching the top of the market. We just don't know. But you want to be a little bit more cautious if you're getting a little older in age, maybe you're approaching retirement, you might want to be a little more cautious, maybe putting a bigger down payment, because the reality is if the market was to drop significantly and crash for whatever reason, you may be underwater on your mortgage and unable to sell without being at a tremendous loss, which in that case that puts you in a very bad situation financially. So safety and wealth building, these are the two things that we really want to consider when it comes to a down payment on our house. So with that said, if you are young to middle-aged and you are able to comfortably afford a housing payment between 25 to 30% of your income, then I'm going to highly recommend that you put down as little as possible for your down payment. Now if it's your first home or you haven't owned a home in the last 3 years, then you're going to be able to put down as little as 3% down using a conventional loan. Now if you have owned a home in the last 3 years, then if you're going the conventional route, you're going to be able to put down still as little as 5% down. Now the reason I'm mentioning conventional loans is because I believe that conventional loans are a much better way to go versus FHA loans, and if you want some more information on why I believe that, definitely check out my video link below on conventional versus FHA loans. So anyways, here's some of the biggest reasons why I highly recommend going this route if you are young to middle-aged. For one, you're going to get a much higher return on investment over the long run if you put a lower down payment. So for example, let's say you were going to buy a $500,000 property. If you had the cash available, hypothetically, you could buy that property in cash and you would get the appreciation over the long run on a $500,000 investment. Whereas if you were to put 3% down, you would only have to put $15,000 down, yet at the same time you're going to still get the appreciation on that $500,000. So in this example, if home prices were to go up 10% in 1 year, you would have gained $50,000 in home equity, which means that based on your $15,000 initial investment, you will have more than quadrupled your initial investment in just 1 year, and that is the power of a low down payment. Now, some are going to argue and say, just as you can gain $50,000 in equity just like that, you can also lose $50,000 in equity if the market was to crash. But that's where this building wealth mentality and safety mindsets both come come into play. You see, as a young person, or even a middle-aged person for that matter, you have the ability to take on more risk, because even if the housing market was to crash hypothetically, you could just keep holding on to it until the market recovers again, because let's face it, over the long period of time, real estate always goes back up again. There may be ups and downs along the way, but if you're willing to hold on for the long term, 20, 30 years, then you are able to avoid that risk of having to deal with the housing crash, because you can ride it as the market goes back up again. So that eliminates one of the biggest concerns when it comes to buying a property with a low down payment. But you might also be wondering, well, what if during that market crash I ended up losing my job? Then how would I make the payments? Because now I'm underwater on my mortgage. I have to sell the property because I can't make the payments. I'm in big trouble, right? Well, you're also able to mitigate this risk if you're able to rent out the house. Now, if you use a conventional loan or even an FHA loan, you only technically have to live in the house for 1 year before you're allowed to move out of the house and then rent it out as a long-term rental property. Now, you might be wondering, well, how would you be able to afford a rental property on top of your own mortgage, taxes, insurance as well? Well, the way this works is if you don't already have a lot of disposable income, you simply target properties that would make for good rental properties. That's simply a property that produces enough rental income to cover all your expenses. So I'm talking about your mortgage, your taxes, your insurances, if you have HOAs. You also want to be able to cover maintenance, future vacancies, and property management, just in case you may not down the road want to manage your property. So by targeting properties like this, you don't have to worry about extra money coming out of your pocket, even in a worst case scenario where you lost your job and you have to rent out the house, because the rental income is enough to cover all the expenses associated with that house. Now, with that said, not every single house will be able to generate enough rental income to cover all of its expenses. So one thing I like to look at is the size of the house, because you really want to target a house that is suitable for the majority of Americans. For instance, I like to buy homes that are less than 2,500 square feet because the majority of Americans can afford that. And once you go beyond that, even as a rental, you start to see that the rental pool starts to shrink for that, because if you can afford, say, a 4,000 square foot home to rent it, then you're probably going to be able to afford to buy a smaller home than that. So those kind of renters that are renting those 4,000 square feet homes are normally renters by choice, not by necessity. And what you'll find is because the renter pool is smaller, the demand is less, which means that the rents don't keep up with the price of the home. And so as you get higher and higher in these prices, typically the rental income isn't enough to pay off all the expenses associated with that house. You might also be dealing with longer vacancy periods with these larger homes because there's just not the same amount of demand for them. Now, if you want to get an idea of what you could hypothetically rent out a house for, I highly recommend reaching out to a local property manager, in fact 2 to 3 property managers, and get their opinions on what they think the house could rent out for, because they see this stuff every single day and they'll have a really good idea of what the houses can rent for. So anyways, that's how I'm able to mitigate the risk of even a potential job loss during a market crash, because if you're able to rent out the house, you don't even have to be on the hook for those payments anymore if somebody else is paying them for you. Now, some people are also going to say, well, what about PMI? Whenever you have a low down payment, you're going to have PMI attached to it, and isn't that just a waste of money? So PMI stands for private mortgage insurance, and it's basically an added insurance that you get whenever you put less than 20% down. It's just an extra insurance payment that the bank requires because they're giving you a riskier loan by letting you put less money down. But what many people don't realize, and this is why I love conventional loans instead of FHA loans, is you don't have to pay PMI forever. It's something that will eventually come off of your loan payment. With conventional financing, unlike FHA loans, you don't have to refinance in order to remove your PMI. You can actually just simply wait until your mortgage balance is at 78% and it will automatically be removed. You can also call a lender yourself and ask for it to be removed once your mortgage balance hits 80% of the original amount, and they will remove it, and that's about 7.5 years into your 30-year mortgage. But what many people don't realize is you actually don't even have to wait that long in order to remove your PMI. You see, if you just have 20% equity in your home, maybe the home has gone up in value tremendously over the last year. I know that some markets in the US have gone up over 30% in the last year alone, so those people that just bought even with the minimum 3% will already have more than 20% equity at that point. They can remove their PMI by simply asking for a broker price opinion or an appraisal to take place in order to remove the PMI. So by 20% equity, I'm talking about if you had a $500,000 house and you owed $400,000 on your mortgage, the difference between that is the $100,000, and that is your home equity. Now, removing your PMI is not that hard. I recently did it on my own house, which I purchased in March of 2021, and because appreciation went up so much so fast, I've gained a lot of equity on the home that even though I put less than 20% down, now I have well over 20% equity, and I was able to remove my PMI in January of this year. So because of this, I didn't have to wait the 7.5 years to call up the lender and remove it, and so the PMI really hasn't been a real negative since I've only really paid about 10 months of it. Now at the same time, you got to consider I got a much higher return on investment because I put less money into the deal with a lower down payment. Now understand that with a conventional loan, you're going to need at least a 620 credit score in order to qualify for that type of loan, but if you have under a 620 credit score, you can still qualify for an FHA loan, which still lets you use a 3.5% down payment, still really good overall, and as long as you have a 580 or above, you can still do that. Now if you have even lower than 580, you could still use an FHA loan, but they're going to require you at that point to put at least 10% down instead of 3.5%. Now let's say you don't have any money to use as a down payment, but you could still comfortably afford a house even with 0% down. Well, there is 3 ways in which you can actually do that. The first way you can do this is using a VA loan. Now understand that a VA loan is specifically meant for those who are veterans or have served in the National Guard or military in some capacity. If that's not you, then unfortunately you won't be able to use this loan, but if you have and you meet those qualifications, then you could put 0% down on a home. Now the second way to do this is you could use a USDA loan, but understand with a USDA loan, you're pretty much only down to rural areas that you can utilize this 0% down loan. Now they do offer an interactive map online that you can check out and see which areas qualify, but most areas that are even moderately populated won't qualify for this loan, unfortunately. In addition to that, there are income requirements that go along with the USDA loan, so for that reason, most people aren't going to be able to use this for a 0% down payment. Now finally, you have NACA. Now with NACA, this is a great option potentially for people with a low income or people who are struggling to qualify for a conventional or an FHA loan. The pros with using a NACA loan is you can actually use a 0% down payment, and in addition to that, the interest rate is definitely lower than a conventional or an FHA loan. But with that said, the downside is there are a lot of requirements that go along with getting a NACA loan. For instance, no member of the household is allowed to have any ownership interest in a property at the time of closing. You also have to occupy the home as long as you have a NACA mortgage in place, which is actually a lot different than what you experience with a conventional or an FHA loan, which you only have to live in the property technically for 1 year before you're able to move out, and you could actually hold the property on as a rental property at that point. With the NACA mortgage, you cannot do that. However, one caveat to that is you are able to still sell the property, and you are still able to refinance that NACA mortgage into a conventional loan later on down the line to where you can eventually do that. You also have to participate in 5 actions and activities every year that you have the NACA mortgage, and that includes one that you need to do prior to qualification and one that you need to do prior to closing. Now, in addition to all this, there's also a lot of neighborhoods you're unable to buy in due to income limits. So overall, there's a lot of restrictions that come along with this mortgage. So although it could be a good opportunity for the right person, many cases it's often better to go with an FHA or a conventional loan if you're able to do that, so you can have more flexibility with what you do with the house and you don't have so many restrictions. Now let's take a step back and assume that maybe you're looking to retire in the next few years. Maybe you got to prepare for lower expenses because your income probably isn't going to be the same as it is right now. Well, if that's the situation that you're in, I would highly recommend trying to have a larger down payment, for one reason being that you can avoid your PMI costs. Now, I know that I did previously mention that with the PMI you are able to remove it even faster than the 7.5 years, but if the market was not to move in your favor and go up at a very fast rate like we've been seeing, then in that case you could find yourself in trouble having to wait 7.5 years before you are able to remove it. So for this reason, if that's the position you're in, I would recommend trying to get at least 20% for your down payment to avoid those PMI costs, but in addition to have a little bit of a buffer for if the market was to have a downturn, you have a little bit of protection built in there so that even if the market dips 20%, you're not underwater on your mortgage. And in addition to that, I would like to add that you can take this as far as you want. If you want to go to a 30% down payment, 40% down payment, 50% down down payment. The point is you can take this as far as you want to take it. At the end of the day, it comes down to a personal preference. Everybody's situation is different. I don't know what everybody's expenses will look like when they're retired, and so ultimately you have to make that decision of what you're comfortable with paying on a monthly basis, but at least having that 20% equity in there gives you a bit of a shield, a bit of protection in case of a market downturn. So overall, for most of you, particularly those that are not about to approach retirement, I would highly suggest going with the lower down payment, because over the long run, you're going to build significantly more wealth if you do it that way. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did and you feel like you gained some value today, do me a favor and smash that like button. And if you haven't already done so, definitely subscribe and hit that notification bell to watch more content like this. Also, let me know in the comments if you have any questions or thoughts, and I'll do my best to respond. Finally, follow me on TikTok and Instagram at The Out of State Investor. And before you guys go, I'm going to highly recommend you check out my video on 10 questions to ask before you buy a house. You can check that out right over here. Or if you want to check out my other video on FHA loans versus conventional loans, you can check that one out right over here. And with that said, I'll see you guys on the next one.